So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Binda and I've got the pleasure of hosting this next session themed around rebuilding our communities. We've got two really exciting and inspirational speakers, I would say, who bring terrific insight and a great deal of passion into their work just from my earlier conversations with them. So what we'll do is we'll step through both the presentations and then have the Q&A session at the end. Firstly, we'll hear from Ludo Campbell-Reid, who is Director of City Design and Livability at Wyndham. Ludo's going to take us on a visionary journey around urban landscape and how we can reimagine our cities and, create future spaces of work, of leisure, of play that enhance well-being. So very much focused around what future cities can look like. We'll also hear from John McLinden, CEO of Swan Hill City Council, and that will provide sort of the contrast of a rural and regional perspective, covering both sort of, the pandemic impacts and what recovery looks like for those economies and communities. I think both presentations will be very positive and uplifting and, all about sort of the opportunities really that lie ahead for us. And I think as finance professionals, also to challenge our thinking in terms of how we react to some of these objectives and visions that are presented to us to enable in sort of meeting those outcomes. So as I said, we'll hear from both speakers first and have Q&A at the end. Both will go for around 20 minutes each. So with that, Ludo, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Linda, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for firstly inviting me to be here. I'm really honoured and deeply privileged, so thank you. I'm going to just try and share my screen, and here we go. So is that now playing?
All good, yeah.
That's great, and just want to go from the beginning. So there we go. So look, I'll get into it. Cities are big business, and they're the engines of our economies. And my last role in Auckland over the last 13 years was at Auckland Council. Auckland Council was the largest unitary authority in Australasia. 10,500 staff, $68 billion of assets, and a $5.5–6 billion operating budget. That's big business by anyone's terms. So how we manage cities really matters. And recent events have put cities in sharp focus in terms of our minds. Getting them back up and running, getting them working, getting them productive, getting them prosperous is the #1 priority of governments and city councils all over the world. And why? Because our livelihoods and our well-being depends on it. So to do that successfully, we need to much better understand how cities work. What makes them tick? What makes them fail? What makes them die? All these things need to be far better understood. And so today I'd like to introduce you to some concepts around successful city making and shaping. And I guess that's really what my aim is today. And when you really think about that, the link between successful cities and innovation in financial management could not be clearer. If you don't understand money, you don't understand how to do much. And if you don't understand budgeting, you don't understand how to manage projects, you end up getting a bit of a shock. So look, ultimately, I've come from a 30-year background in city shaping. This is a project I worked on in Cape Town, the waterfront in Cape Town, one of the master planners. Then in the 90s, I was leading the urban regeneration at Canary Wharf in London, in the east of London. And then more recently in Auckland, I led a range of programs. This is our waterfront in 2009, and this is it in 2015, years later, as a result of successive change and renewal. And also some projects which sort of make you smile, sexy, super soaring cycling highways built on old motorway, redundant motorway infrastructure built at a time when, huge cost, but absolutely negligent in many respects. So it's really important. So let's talk mobility around cities. and really how this links to finance, because cities were originally designed to maximize interaction, trade, and commerce, but whilst minimizing the need to travel. And so cities in many hundreds of years ago created certain city shapes and forms based on the ability of people to move at speed or not, as the case may be. And as we move forward into the 60s and 70s, we went through a city building program which we started to destroy cities, to break down that walkability, that sense of competitiveness, all in the name of accessibility for the private car. The left photograph is the Katy Freeway in Houston. It is 27 lanes wide. There is congestion every single day, and the administration in Houston is thinking of widening it at a huge cost. So the link between cost and city design is absolutely fundamental, but often the people in charge of making these decisions are not really understanding the true unintended consequences of the things that they do. And when you build projects on the left, you get a city that looks like that on the right, where you have to simply provide car parking to bring people into those cities. And at the worst, this is what the private development looks like, the housing development, when you have a certain approach to city shape and city sprawl. And thinking about this across the Melbourne suburbs, across the Victoria, a lot of Melbourne looks like this: car-dependent, auto-dependent neighborhoods where people don't know each other as well. They have to do everyday trips they do by car. So it's really important. But humans are lazy, ultimately. The link between designing cities and psychology is also very important. If you make it easy for human beings to do certain things, they will behave in certain ways. And at worst, they start to behave in absurd and crazy ways. However, if you don't provide footpaths, then where else would they walk the dog? And at the end of the day, whilst we're developing technology to colonize Mars, we've got cities around the world where you just can't cross the street. And so who's the customer? Who is the customer? And look at the expense that we spend on these wide roads, these wide intersections, but it's not deriving productivity. It's not driving vibrancy. And at the very worst, it does this. This is a scheme, a road in London, where the old man is simply trying to cross the road. This project has been managed, built, designed by single-minded engineers who are focused on simply moving traffic across and through London. But ultimately, human beings don't want to move in the same way that the traffic does. And so these young people are forced into behaving in absurd and dangerous ways because they want to cross the street at ground level. They don't want to go underneath the ground. I mean, these people aren't escaping from Kosovo. They're trying to walk across the road. And so all these things have unintended consequences. And so whilst these are clever engineering ideas and products, they don't solve the core problem of cities. And so if you really want to solve the core problem of cities, you have to understand that geography and geometry is the problem. Space is the final frontier. And so if you've got money you want to spend on moving people across the city, what is the most spatially efficient way to move people? Well, you can see by this slide that the best way to move people, the most sort of space efficient way, is to move them by transit, by bus, or by rail. So what is the best RFI for our investment? And when you look at space and the way in different products or transport products provide different abilities to move around, one bus takes 250 people with that amount of space. 56 bicycles take up that amount of space. 56 cars take up that amount of space. It's not about saying anti-cars. It's about understanding that transport is a system, and you need to provide elements of the system, not just one, but a network. And it's really important for those of you that think that artificial intelligence is going to save the world. Well, let me tell you that that is wrong. 56 petrol cars take up exactly the same space as 56 electric cars and exactly the same amount of space as 56 self-driving cars. So it's really important that we start to understand this. So moving forward in terms of, so what does good look like? And there are many examples around the world of places that have transformed themselves. This was London. This was Oxford Circus, one of the great streets of the world. Pedestrians crammed to the edges. The space, not really great space for shopping. Under Mayor Boris at the time, a new city was renewed, wider pavements, slowed the traffic and widened the ability, the productivity, the performance of that street. Again, projects, again, this is in the north of England, a freezing city called Northumberland in Newcastle, a very cold part of the UK. Top left was the project in the 70s, a real mixed bag of buses, cars, people crossing the streets. An intermediary project in the bottom left-hand corner where vehicles were removed, but it wasn't really designed properly. And in the 90s, they completely pedestrianized. Each change was met by massive opposition until implemented, and then unanimous support of the final product. And it actually had the second highest retail floor space rental in the UK after Oxford Street as a result of these changes. And so you can see different places around the world utilizing public space in different ways, driving productivity, driving performance. All these things are bringing money, vibrancy, economic livelihood back to cities. So the link between the two are fundamental. And this was the Embarcadero in San Francisco, one of the great cities of the world. A minor earthquake knocked down part of this 4-story freeway, severing the city from the ocean. And the city fathers, the transport planners, the urban designers decided to remove that freeway system and build a city for people. And so there are many parts of the world where this journey has occurred. Copenhagen as well, when this was introduced, this idea of pedestrianized cities. The Danes said, look, we're not Italians. We don't do this. They do, of course they do this. So it just takes time. So that there are many projects which I can share. And this is one that I led in Auckland with my team and many people across Auckland. We introduced an idea of shared spaces where we removed car parking from some of our major streets. They weren't performing that well anyway, but many businesses were very cynical. But after removing car parking, widening the pavements, building opportunities for more diversity, more commerce, we saw a 440% uplift in retail hospitality takings. I mean, this is huge money. The link between money and between urban design is inextricably linked. So what have I learned? What have we learned in the last 30 years of building cities? I'm just checking my time. I've got 7 minutes left, so I'm doing okay. So the first thing that we learn is about partnership. We have to work alongside the public, the private. And the projects that I showed you in Auckland, many of those projects in the downtown Auckland were delivered through a targeted rate. And so I was able to leverage $22 million a year over 10 years to actually provide better quality outcomes, better quality public realm, higher level of services, higher level of cleaning, cleanliness, marketing. All these projects were paid for by the businesses. So we leveraged a differential, a business differential on the businesses of the downtown, very much focused around the Pacific area. And when we delivered the projects, not only was it for the businesses, it was the business money that paid for it. And then those businesses became the champions for that project. So the link between the good urban design and good fiscal management was clear. I showed you that image of that project in Florida, the auto-dependent city. It's about choice. And so when we see this project here, this is America's first development in a great city called Boston. The most important thing, forget about the architecture, forget about the design, forget about the parks, but look at what it enables. Look at what it pays for. This is 1,550 feet from the Cheers bar, 6 bars, 8 delis, 4 banks, 3 hardware stores, 2 florists, 18 restaurants, 5 churches, a pharmacist, a medical center, dozens and dozens. Density delivers productivity, and it's called the productivity dividend. We need more people to pay for the assets that we've created. And so it's important that we start to understand that. Vehicle traffic and levels of traffic is a key determinant on the amount or the level of interactions we have as human beings. The higher the vehicle traffic, the less we know our neighbors. And here's this study in San Francisco where you can clearly see the different levels of interactions. If you want to build a great high street, you want to slow the traffic down. You don't want to discourage traffic, but you just want to slow it down, which means people can cross the roads to shop, which again builds economic productivity and livelihood. And what I've always said for many years is that, look at this photograph. The public transport I describe it as fountains of people. Literally, it's delivering thousands and thousands of people on your doorstep. So public transport is about freedom and it's about economic development. Without it, nothing happens. And for me, this is an important point to raise, is that I believe that there's safety in numbers, not in plastic helmets. This is photographs of people cycling in Amsterdam and Holland. People are not cycling worried about, the health benefits versus the injury costs. Thinking about this from a financial point of view, what is the better financial model? The better financial model is for us, everyone, to cycle, to walk more. We'll be healthier, we'll be happier. We'll use the medical services far less. So the link between the two is clear. The last few points I wanted to raise before we move to our next speaker is data. And we make decisions based on both head and heart. This quote from Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, said, "In God we trust, but everybody else, you bring me the data." And so it's really important that we utilize data to make better decisions. And this was a project that I'm just showing here, was a survey. We were looking to deliver a cycleway, a walkway project in one of our busy streets in New Zealand, in Auckland. And the businesses were really against the idea of removing car parking, because they felt that all the businesses, all their customers came by car. So we asked them to estimate, how many people do you think, what's the percentage of customers that come by car? And then we actually surveyed, and what they felt was 41%, and what actually was the reality was 17% came by car. In fact, only 17% came by car, but the rest of the travel was done by foot, by bus, by bike, and by taxi. So when you design the street, why would you design it to meet the needs of the private car when actually the customers are actually coming through different ways? So it's about using data and money and conversations. And it's exactly the same in Melbourne. This was a study by Arups, undertaken by Victoria Walks, and it shows you exactly the same conversation where the importance of car access was greatly overestimated by retailers. In fact, almost double. And see, it's the same story in every city around the world. In fact, most of the car parking outside of retail shops is taken up by the retail workers themselves. So what do we do there? We need to provide public transport for these people to get home. So the last few points is really understanding celebrate what makes your city unique. What is your point of difference? This is the Blackpool comedy carpet. Blackpool in the UK is famous for its comedy, and so they created this wonderful outdoor space where you can read comedic sketches, drama, and art, all portrayed in the spaces. Cities that have dance as part of their history, their culture, provide spaces for people to do what they need to do to make their city unique and distinctive. And if you can't make it distinctive because you don't, if you want to make it unique and you don't have all those assets, do things differently, be creative. Where is this slide taken? South of France? No, it's the center of Paris. It's about the Parisians thinking, well, how do we bring the sea to our city, and providing places, removing lanes of traffic and building new outdoor spaces. And at the end of the day, you don't have to gold plate everything. City change doesn't have to cost billions. It's about simply engaging with the community around us and allowing them, giving them permission to create great outcomes. And that drawing on the top right, that's Dante's Inferno. I mean, to do that, the skill levels are extraordinary. But people are out there in our communities just not being given that opportunity. And so I guess as a last slide, if anyone tells you, everyone tells me all the time, we can't do that, Ludo. We're not Amsterdam, we're unique, we're different to that city. Our city is unique. Then show them a picture of Amsterdam in the 1970s and say neither was Amsterdam. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much for that, Ludo. And everyone, if you've got any questions, please post them and we'll come to those towards the end. With that, I'll hand over to you, John. Thank you. John, you'll need to unmute.
Sorry guys, how's that?
That's fine, great, thank you.
You can see me on the screen, can you?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Good. So to the audience, apologies first, you don't have a great display like we had from Ludo. You've got my boring dial and monotone for the next few minutes, but I'll try and create some word pictures in your minds. And look, my discussion's a story about what the Swan Hill Rural City and its community are proposing to do to rebuild our economy and our community as we go through and out of the restrictions and the effects that COVID have brought upon us and our people. And look, I really see this as a piece of work that's going to have many layers. There's certainly a long-term recovery layer, and that is starting now, but also continuing into the future. And there's also some short-term things that we have done and are continuing to do. And no doubt in between there are many, many other layers of works that and actions we'll need to take that we haven't perhaps identified yet. Look, the long-term game is really about making our economy and our community able to exploit the opportunities that we know that are going to come along and that will present themselves as the whole world comes out of COVID. As the world responds to COVID and its recovery, there will be opportunities that come our way. More so in the short term, however, our job is to support the rebuilding of our social structures and our local economic capacity, and also to provide leadership to our community. There are many other layers in this, and we see it really as a continuum of events that we will need to deal with over the coming years. Let me start, however, by talking a little bit about our economy and our community. I know we've got a broad audience from across Victoria, and for those of you who haven't been to Swan Hill, well, shame on you, but there is time for redemption. You should, when Victoria is allowed to move around, you should come up here because it is a great place. We are actually a powerhouse of food production. We produce well in excess of $1 billion worth of food a year. We're on the eastern edge of the Mallee and have traditionally produced vast volumes of cereals and legumes, wheat, barley, etc. Red meat, particularly prime lamb and beef. But also in recent times, in the last couple of decades, we've seen a significant increase in horticulture, primarily fed from the Murray. We produce 70% of Australia's almonds. They are grown here, mostly processed in our neighbouring municipality of Mildura, but we actually grow 70% of Australia's almonds. A similar proportion of Australia's olive oil is grown in this municipality. If we're looking at a word picture, I'd like you to see rolling fields of beautiful green-topped carrots, irrigated under centre pivot circular irrigators as far as the eye can see. As you drive down the road and crest the next sand dune, there's more carrots and there's more carrots. We produce 25% of Australia's carrots, and it's one farmer, one family-owned farm that does that. They're all packed, graded and processed and distributed from this municipality, although they're grown primarily here, but also up in St George in Queensland and over in Conniva. The purpose for that, I guess, spread of geography is because they distribute to Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney and Brisbane and backload carrots. You turn our economy off, a quarter of the carrots in all of the supermarkets in all of Australia disappear overnight. So you know those pictures we saw on the news about the raided supermarkets after the panic buying of COVID-19? That's what the carrot aisles will look like if you turn our economy off. Stone fruit, citrus and table grapes. Boy, let me tell you about the table grapes. Over the last 10 years, 9 of the 10 years, table grapes have increased the returns to farmers year on year. Robinvale, which sits in the north of our municipality, has the highest proportion per capita of millionaires of any postcode in Australia. They are primarily, but not exclusively, primarily Italian farmers, family farms, who have been growing table grapes for many years now and have perfected their trade. This municipality turns over $60 million a year, and for some of the audience that will be far in excess of their municipalities, and for many that'll be a lot less. But we're a $60 million a year outfit. We have dozens of family farms whose turnover dwarfs ours. And that's not big business, that's just the family operations. Then we've got a heap of corporates. We produce an enormous amount of food in the Swan Hill region, is that message. Secondly, we have a very significant manufacturing and construction sector, a lot of niche manufacturing, primarily servicing the agricultural sector. And we are certainly a serious regional service centre for much of the Mallee and beyond. We attract business really from as far as Bendigo, Horsham, Shepparton and Deniliquin. And if you get north of us and go across the Murray River into New South Wales, you pretty much bump into the Queensland border before you find any real economic capacity. And so much of New South Wales comes to us. In the western portion of New South. We've got a population of 20,000 people, but the real number is actually about 30,000. We have about 10,000 hidden migrant workers who are here all the time. We talk about harvest season or fruit season or picking season. For us, the season is about 10 months of the year, given the diversity of crops that we have now. And many of those 10,000 are documented and here legally, and there's a proportion that are here hiding. But without that labour, our horticultural sector would really languish. Turning to Swan Hill for a moment, we're a town that wants to be a regional city. We've wanted to be that for a long time and have worked pretty hard at that. There are some sectors of our community, however, I'll say that really aren't ready for that. But we're a vibrant community with lots of serious business acumen, social diversity, and certainly huge social and entertainment opportunities. So I'd now like to turn, having talked and painted a bit of a picture about what Swan Hill is, let's talk about what we're going to do to get this vibrancy back, because like all of Victoria, perhaps all of Australia, through the restrictions brought about by COVID-19, we have lost a bit of that vibrancy. Although we remind ourselves daily how lucky we are to live and work in country Victoria, and we do share a thought for our friends in Metro Melbourne who have undergone some pretty severe restrictions. That said, we do carry one burden, and that is that we are a border community, and the communities either side of the Murray River do act as one social and economic unit, and that has been severely disrupted because of the border shutdowns from New South Wales preventing Victorians' entry. And there for a period of time, the difficulties that our communities were labouring under were in fact more severe than the capital cities of Melbourne and Sydney, although not since Melbourne's been through its more draconian lockdowns. Let's move the conversation to what long-term recovery looks like. And for us in this rural and regional economy, we see that jobs are pivotal. I know it's a bit of a circular argument that jobs drive consumption, consumption drives production, production drives retail and so on, and you end up getting back at needing jobs again. We see our role as focusing on trying to support existing industry to expand and also to support new industries to come in and set up in the municipality. That's a pretty standard economic development recipe, but it's what we do put a lot of energy into, and we really focus on creating jobs. Pre-COVID-19, we effectively had an unemployment rate of 0 in this municipality. If you had any skills and capacity to work, there was work here for you in this municipality. We were a little sceptical as to what COVID-19 might do to unemployment in our economy. And I'd have to say that we have discovered that it's become a fair bit worse than what we'd previously thought it was going to be. And we've found a number of people who have been hidden in the woodwork that have come out looking for work since we've engaged in an employment program that I'll talk about a little later on. But that said, we've got sectors of our economy that are absolutely booming and businesses that are up 300% year on year from last year because of the boom in agriculture. So we spent a lot of time working on attracting business and trying to create an environment where jobs can flourish in our municipality. Another plank to our long-term recovery is to assist in innovation. We see the need for significant innovation if our industries are to exploit the opportunities of the post-COVID-19 environment. Market access is probably a significant one. Many of our serious horticulturalists have gone away from marketing desks and have now got to a scale and have been operating for long enough that they have direct relationships with importers, primarily from China, but also in a number of other countries. I know of one stone fruit grower who frankly, it's not much more than a family business, but these are multi-million-dollar family businesses who has export relationships with direct importers in 23 countries across the world, primarily through Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Now, COVID-19 has really knocked that around, and our relationship with China is certainly under some strain at this point in time. We're expecting to see a number of our markets in China evaporate, either because of, and primarily because of a lack of confidence. They may come back, but it will take time. Product development is another area where we think that we need to assist our businesses to innovate. And if I'm going to be brutally honest, sometimes the assistance that they need from us is for us to get out of the way. Particularly our horticulture and manufacturing sector are very good at innovating, changing varieties, changing the way the product is presented to market, dealing with supply chain solutions and the like. And then I'll come back again to the same old problem we always land on, and that's labour supply. Creating jobs and then being able to fill those jobs is a constant challenge for us, and we do a lot of work on that. And we think in the long term, to set our economy and our community up for a prosperous future post-COVID-19, we need to be looking at a serious support for innovation for the real goers in our economy. And then the other thing is economic diversification. I've got to say, early on in COVID-19, I was in a hookup with CEOs from across the state, and I'm talking in the first couple of weeks of the pandemic, so very early April. The level of alarm, and maybe not panic, but certainly alarm being expressed by my colleagues in metro councils confounded me a little, because in regional Victoria, we were kind of a bit of a, oh yeah, nah, not too much to see here, move along point. Understanding that perhaps in future there was something coming our way. I understood pretty quickly that the reason for the concern in Metro Melbourne was just the extent to which many of those local economies were tied to the cafe scene. And in metro economies, there is so much more investment in hospitality, cafe culture, restaurants and so forth compared to our economy, where frankly the hospitality sector, whilst important, is minute compared to the main game of food production and manufacturing. That said, diversification is extremely important, and our reliance on agriculture at this point in time has been our saviour. It could also become our Achilles heel. I certainly hope that the world never loses its appetite for almonds or wheat-based products or red meats for that matter. If the world all of a sudden stopped eating almonds, our economy would take an enormous kick and would take years to recover from. So we have become not quite monoculture, but there are certain very heavy dependencies in our economic system, particularly our agricultural system, that requires a bit of diversification to perhaps shelter us from the buffets that would come. And look, I might now turn to the more immediate, to what we're doing now, what we have been doing, and what we see we need to do in the short term to assist our community in relation to responding to the opportunities that come along as we come out of COVID-19. And we're really focusing on our social structures. Like everyone at this meeting, our communities have been isolated one way or another for 6 months now. Life in Swan Hill is pretty good, let me tell you. I've got to say that. We are a social town, and our activities really do revolve around sports of all kinds. We have more sunshine in Swan Hill than the Gold Coast, and apparently it only rains on 20 days. Although if that's an average, then I suspect we're in for a few dry years because we've had a lot of rain this year. But we are an outdoors community, and we have a fantastic climate for outdoor sports. And all of that's been taken away from us this year. There's been no organised winter sports program. Our juniors haven't been able to play football, netball, soccer, etc. We're hopeful and confidently hopeful that with summer coming that our cricket and tennis can resume, and there's some good reasons why that's a lot safer sport given the distancing rather than a contact sport. In Swan Hill, there's plenty of activities around more refined arts such as dance studios, dance clubs, theatre, and we've got a huge array of special interest groups. Again, all of those have not been able to undertake their activities. We've had a very strong, primarily elderly volunteer base doing a whole bunch of stuff in our community. But two main draw cards are our Meals on Wheels delivery roster. And in Swan Hill, we have a pioneer settlement, which is effectively an outdoor, well, I'm going to say theme park. It's an outdoor museum, frankly, built on the Mallee 1830 to 1930. I should know those years. It has been supported by approximately 70 elderly volunteers every day, 363 days of the year. And we've had to send all of those volunteers home because we can't operate the facility and they are elderly and vulnerable. So the volunteers provide a great support to our pioneer village, but equally it provided a great social outlet for people who had otherwise been quite isolated in their homes. And we are quite concerned that a number of those people haven't been able to come back and join us, and we want to get that happening as soon as we possibly can. It certainly COVID-19 and its restrictions have certainly disrupted us significantly. So what are we doing about that? We're poised to assist the resumption of all of these social activities, and we're doing the very best that we can. However, we have a commitment here that we will push up against the walls of the rules that are in place, but we'll never break them. So there are a number of facilities that we in our community feel we could open right now, but if the restrictions provided by the state allow it, we will. If they don't, we will not. So of course our libraries have reopened this week and getting ready for a few other things on the basis of last weekend's restrictions easing. We want to get our kids back playing sport. That's a high priority, particularly our junior sports competitions. We want to make sure and are making sure that our playing surfaces are ready. We've been keeping our playing surfaces up to speed all year. We were thinking about a reduced maintenance regime, but knew that that would cost us, so we've kept those going. We do have some deep concerns about some of our football clubs, and football is important. I know it's not everything, but it is important to our community. We've had a number of clubs, and I think you could say that this is the case for right across rural Victoria, where those clubs have been hanging on by their fingernails. No committee wants to be the committee that sees a football club that's run for 50 or 100 years fold, but there have been a number of them that have been struggling for either on-field players or juniors or committee. Now, we've got a whole community now that have had a year with not having to turn up and work their guts out to keep the comp running. We've got mums and dads who haven't had to be the taxi to take their kids to football or soccer or training or what have you, and have found other things to do and have kind of thought, you know, this is all right. So we do have concerns that there might be a couple of clubs, and we can't predict who they'll be, may fold. And so we're ready to try and make sure that the overall competition doesn't fold, and we'll assist with any restructuring that might happen there. We're supporting our hospitality and tourism sector, outdoor dining, street activation, events. We're operating or about to operate a Dine Local program, undertake some street closures and on it goes. I probably don't need to elaborate too much on that. Swan Hill is really no different to any other part of Victoria or urban Victoria in regards to that. But the hospitality sector certainly does need a lot of little responses, each of which might be slightly different venue on venue. And we understand that we'll need to do bespoke responses to each of those. We did find that most of our cafes and restaurants weren't as eager to reopen full on with the easing of restrictions as we thought they were. You'll recall, and I've forgotten when now, but it was a couple of months back, there was an opening, they just got to open, and just before they were about to open, there was a clampdown because we got into that second wave. A number of those got their fingers burnt, either financially with stocking up or perhaps just emotionally, they lost a bit of their pluck. So they've been very cautious to reopen, but they are now starting to flourish and understand that life is starting to get back to normal in country Victoria. And we certainly want to make sure that our community groups can get back together and get those social structures and bonds working. And the other thing that we're doing in terms of short-term recovery is one of leadership. It's certainly important in local government that our councillors and our senior executive of the organisation provide leadership, and our communities and our staff, for that matter, look for that. So our communities are looking for constant and more and more constant communication. So we've been very busy in keeping our staff and our community up to date, in fact, over-informed on what's going on. At times when there's little to report on, we're trying to make up ways to redress up the story to keep our community informed. And we know that our community wants some certainty and know that we have a plan, and we've been pretty clear in communicating with our community what our plan for the recovery process is. And in particular, what they're looking for is courage and vision in their leaders, and isn't that the role of local government everywhere at a local level? So thanks, folks. That's what's happening in Swan Hill, and I hope that's been of some interest and certainly a bit of contrast to Ludo's highly exciting presentation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, both Ludo and John. Contrast, and that's always what we look for because the sector is so diverse. So thank you again. We do have some time for questions. I'll kick it off with a question, and if both of you can just sort of comment briefly. Both of you mentioned, that we need to address communities for recovery, assist in the recovery, and yet we need communities to be able to recover. How do you see sort of almost the competition across the various municipalities playing out on that path to recovery? City of Melbourne's looking for people, regional cities are wanting to build. How do you see that sort of playing out? Ludo, maybe yourself first.
Thanks, Binda. John, it was great to hear your. That was really. I'm going to come and visit this year when I'm allowed to. So you do a great job We'll definitely enjoy a few almonds together. Binda, look, this is a big conversation, and look, what we're noticing all over the world is that downtowns, main city centres are constricting dramatically. If you think about the impacts of COVID, the impacts on public transport, patronage, London's at 35% at the moment, Melbourne, I think at 40. There's a big constriction of public transport activity, people going to work. Working from home has created probably the biggest shift in urban policy since the invention of the car, since the invention of the combustion engine. This will be the biggest shift in terms of the way we think about cities. And so with commercial real estate also being hit hard, that's through social distancing and worries about health. It takes 10 hours to fill a 30-story tall building if you go up and down in the lift with 2 people. So until we find a remedy for the virus, we're going to be operating like this. And so city centres are concerned, and they are constricting because people are working from home or working close to home. So for me, I think it's a real opportunity for places like Melbourne to start to really think about the idea of a polycentric city rather than a city where everybody heads to the downtown and for work and then heads back out again. The energy costs, the time costs alone are astronomical. This is a real opportunity for regional Victoria to really resurrect itself, to think about, well, we've got all these local people who are working near home. How do we keep them at home? How do we build better city centres, main streets, build cycleways, walkways? How do we think about those? And I think that's really the big opportunity for main streets, which have actually been struggling for many years. We're also getting phone calls from large developers who are the owners of large shopping malls. And a large shopping mall is also a place where you can also congregate, but it's very difficult from a health point of view. So they're wanting to open up their shopping centres, building streets, opening the doors, being more open air. So there's a real opportunity for cities to resurrect themselves, and particularly the local LGAs and the regional Victoria, a real chance for regional renaissance.
Great, thank you. John, would you like to comment?
I'd certainly echo a number of the comments that Ludo made. This is, in a way, regional Victoria's time. Working from home has changed everything. Things that I could not have imagined 6 months ago, I'm quite happy to embrace now. This week, we've interviewed for a particular position, and we're thinking of offering the position to someone from interstate who we will allow to work from home for a period of time before they then get to this organisation, and then certainly may entertain some sort of a sharing arrangement where sometimes in this municipality, sometimes over 1,000 kilometres away. I would never have entertained that as a workable model 6 months ago. It's difficult and dangerous, in fact, to generalise, but I'd have to say that and I know many people and have family living in capital cities, they are living in a heightened state of fear over the effects of COVID-19 than are the average person on the street in rural Victoria. Not perhaps the regional cities, but in rural. That's driven by the fact that for much of rural Victoria, there has actually been virtually no infection. And what little there has been clamped on and dealt with so quickly. and there are some municipalities that have in fact had no recorded cases at all. So it kind of does pervade the psyche of the community a little, and I know that people are genuinely much more fearful in Melbourne, whereas there is a bit of an air of, whatever, it'll be right, in rural, particularly in our small rural communities. We see a great opportunity to capitalise on the impacts of COVID-19 for our communities. Our real estate agents' telephones are rattling off the desk with inquiry from people in Melbourne looking to genuinely get out of Melbourne and work from home. That's not work from home in a more safe environment. So that then brings some real questions up around connectivity, which may end up being one of our significant weaknesses and limiters as to how much we can exploit that. Our estate agents are also dealing with a whole bunch of tyre kickers who are just looking for a rural address and a post box that they will never ever occupy. So as a community, we're all alert to that, because that brings nothing other than heartache and pain to our community, whereas there's a lot of richness that can be brought to our community by people living in our communities, being involved, working from home. As we do more and more work from home, and I think we're all predicting that that's going to be the new norm and will probably flourish, there will certainly be some social issues. And I know for a lot of my staff working from home, and I've also got some family members as well, they're working harder than they have ever worked. They're much more productive. I have one daughter, she clocks on at 8 in the morning and she's still at the computer at 10 at night, and she's not getting any exercise, not going out, not meeting people. We'll need to find ways in our rural and regional communities to make sure that there's lots of social opportunities for people that will be then looking for that. And just at a local selfish level in this municipality, we're looking for some project managers. We reckon the capital cities might be awash with those at present because there's been a bit of a slowdown. We want to try and pick the eyes out of the market and get a couple of those up here as well. So
we'll get the ads up for you.
You better look after them, or are we coming for them?
We'll get the ads for you on our website. Ludo, I did have a question that was submitted for you. What do you see as the unintended consequences of pedestrianising our cities?
Gosh, that's a great question. And with cities, the answers are never binary. So it's never about yes or no, black or white. It's always about shades of grey. And so pedestrianisation of whole cities is completely inappropriate and completely dangerous and wrong. But certain streets, absolutely. And so unintended consequences, well, there's unintended consequences of not pedestrianising the city. The performance of our streets, as I try to show, the link between car parking and economic development is far out. It's not understood or not well understood, but yet it's an easy policy or an easy political polarizing conversation. So, there are projects around the world and places where pedestrianisation is completely inappropriate, and there are places around cities around the world where pedestrianisation is appropriate. And there are many streets in cities which would work well and others that wouldn't. And so, and again, the word pedestrianisation is also quite it's a very black and white word. It means pedestrianisation. It means no cars. There are many, many different ways in which you can detune a city. And you can see the work that John was hinting to slightly in his presentation was around the idea of trials. So making a trial, doing it cheaply, doing it quietly, giving people a chance to experiment, to make decisions, to make mistakes, and to see how it goes, to get feedback from the community. So, as I said, pedestrianisation is often used to polarize arguments, but it's about cities are for people, not for cars. But there's a range of different approaches you can use. So many intended consequences and also many unintended consequences of doing it poorly as well.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes left, but there is one question around finance. So how do we, in terms of wanting to do all this new stuff, shift gear and shift mindsets into sort of the new ways of thinking and delivering some of these projects? And particularly, Ludo, I think there was a reference made to when you mentioned about businesses being prepared to pay, particularly where there is such pushback around rates and the cost of services. So maybe just quick 30-second each, just given time.
Yeah, look, as today has been really interesting, because John and I have spoken about very, very different things, but ultimately that's the thing here. We're not all the same, and we can't paint one brush with everybody. There's no one blueprint, and so some businesses are making so much money they have never had it so good. There are other people who are really struggling, and there are people in the middle. And we have that story in Wyndham, you know, the fastest growing LGA in the whole country. There are some businesses that have never made so much money. There are also businesses who have had the chance to rethink about their business, who've changed their business models because of COVID. They've done things that they were talking about for years and years and years that never got round to it. And then there are also people who are legitimately struggling. And so I think it's about providing solutions for a wide variety of issues, not just simply black and white, here's one size fits all. It's all about the nuance, it's the shades of grey. So some parts of the city might want to pay for more, for a better quality environment. Other areas may not. And maybe the next few years we need to sort of take a bit of a chill pill and do temporary interventions, small scale, cheap, low cost interventions, rather than spending big money on big grandiose plans. Often, great cities are about the multitude of elements and one grand ambition, and I think that probably sums it up best.
Thanks, Ludo. Just a quick 30-second response from yourself, John.
Sure, Binda. Mirroring what Ludo said, actually, take your community and your council along with you. Understand what your community stands for. Hopefully your councils must stand for the same thing or they won't survive. Have a long-term plan to rebuild your economy and your community, and make sure you take your community along with you by communicate, and then keep doing that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So thank you again, both Ludo and John. That's been absolutely fantastic. Lot for us to sort of think about and build into our future sort of programs of work. So with that, I'll close the session.